Welcome to New Strategies for Couples Coping with Chronic Pain. We're glad you're here. My name is Angie Hunt, Project Manager with the Work, Wellness, and Disability Prevention Institute, formerly known as the Canadian Institute for the Relief of Pain and Disability, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. This webinar is made possible through the support of the Community Gaming Grant Program through the BC government, as well as donations and memberships to WWDPI. While we're waiting for others to join us, I'll go over a few technical points for the webinar. You should be able to hear the presentation through your computer speakers or through the conference call line if you dialed in. Please use the question box to submit any issues you may be experiencing and to ask any questions you have related to the presentation. We will collect questions submitted throughout the presentation and follow the presentation with a Q&A based on the questions submitted. Following the webinar, any questions not answered in the allotted time will be answered and distributed after the event. The presentation will be recorded and posted for free on our website within a week, along with the slides. You'll be emailed the direct links for all of these items when they are available. As I mentioned, my name is Angie, and I'll be moderating the webinar and Q&A session. Our presenter today is Annmarie Cano. Dr. Annmarie Cano is a professor of psychology and associate dean of student services in the graduate school at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. Dr. Cano conducts research on emotional regulation, empathy, and intimacy processes in couples facing health problems. She has over 60 publications and has served as PI on grants from the U.S. National Institutes of Health. In recognition of her research contributions, she was elected in 2016 as a Fellow of the American Psychological Association in Divisions 38, Society for Health Psychology, and 43, Society for Couple and Family Psychology. Dr. Cano has also served in the field as associate editor at both Health Psychology and Journal of Family Psychology, and currently sits on the editorial boards of American Psychologist and Journal of Pain. She earned her master's and doctoral degrees in psychology from Stony Brook University and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Princeton. And now I'll hand it over to Annmarie.
Thank you, Angie. I'm very pleased to be here and to share some research insights with the audience, the attendees, both people with pain, their partners, family members, and healthcare professionals. And I will be speaking about new strategies for couples coping with chronic pain. I'd like to start with a case study just to illustrate a little bit about what I'm talking about. This is a case of a couple, Sally and Maria. Sally has had chronic pain for 10 years, and she and her partner both attend Sally's pain assessment session. And in that session, Sally and Maria are reporting that they often miscommunicate about pain, which is a very common occurrence in couples and families. And in fact, just earlier that day, Maria asked Sally if she wanted to go for a walk, to which Sally replied, "No, can't you see that I'm in pain?" Maria then left the house saying, "Fine, I'm leaving without you." Sally experienced a pain flare and rested until it was time for her appointment. And later, they had a silent ride to the office, and the healthcare professional perceived that there was some tension between them. At the session, Sally was able to say that she was actually worrying about this appointment because she was concerned about what a recent test was going to say about her back. And here we see a very common pattern that sometimes happens with people with chronic pain and their family members, where it's hard to talk about the pain to others. It's hard for others who may not have pain to understand it, and this can spill out into the relationship and affect daily life. And so what are couples to do about this? Currently, the treatment options for people with pain, especially in terms of coping with pain, include a number of options, a number of good options, including cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based strategies, and also some more recent strategies where the spouse or the partner is brought in to be a coach and to help support the person with pain. And all of these intervention options are great, but they do not address both partners' stress that may develop from chronic pain and also just living on a day-to-day basis with this in the background. They don't involve both partners directly. And so the new strategies that I'm going to be focusing on today are strategies where both partners are fully engaged and supporting each other, and in particular, looking at something called partner responsiveness. And partner responsiveness is a way of attending to another person's suffering, whether it's emotional or physical. And there's quite a bit of research background to back up this idea of responsiveness as a key factor for couples coping with chronic illness. And so what I'd like to do is perhaps start with a more poetic version of partner responsiveness. And this is a quote. It was written by an Italian-born priest, Monsignor Romano Guardini, about what responsiveness is. And I think I would like for us to keep this definition in mind as we go throughout the webinar, because it's very important to think about what this means to be responsive to somebody else. And so he says, to comfort, you must love. You must be open and enter the other's heart. You must be observant. You must have the free and sensitive heart that finds the paths of life with quiet assurance. You must be able to discover the sore and withered places. You must have the subtlety and strength to penetrate to the living center, to the deep source of life that is dried up. The heart must combine with this source of life, must summon it to life again, so that it can flow through all the deserts and ruins within. And so if we keep this in mind, this idea of responsiveness, that is the strategy that I'm going to really be emphasizing today. So this webinar is broken into 3 parts, all getting at this question of what does it take to be responsive for both partners in a couple. And the first part will be talking about this concept of pain behaviors that we often hear a lot in clinicians talk and in research, and just explaining what are pain behaviors and why should we care about how they're defined. Part 2 will take us to what does it mean to be responsive to those pain behaviors. And part 3 is going to be focusing on how couples can cultivate responsive behaviors. And I'll have a few brief exercises that you can try during the webinar to try to cultivate that responsive outlook. All right, so pain behaviors. This is a technical term that's often used in the literature and in clinical work, and it simply means the expression of pain. Pain behaviors are any way that we express to someone else that we're experiencing pain. And it plays a key role in many different models of pain that have been explored and are the basis of a lot of behavioral pain management interventions. Pain behavior is multidimensional. There are many different kinds of pain behaviors. So facial expressions, which tend to be a more automatic type of pain behavior. So if you're experiencing a pain flare, or even simple things like getting a paper cut or stubbing your toe, usually there's a grimace or a facial expression that comes without you even trying to admit it. It's just the way humans are built. And so it's a way for us to signal to other people in our environment that we're in pain, that we may need some help. The other ways that we express pain might be through how we're walking, if we're rubbing our lower back or your jaw or some other part of your body in a way to soothe yourself. That is also expressing to other people, whether you know it or not, that you're experiencing some pain. And then there are the sighs and groans sometimes that we experience and that we emit. And also just talking about pain, like, wow, my head is really bothering me today, would be considered a pain behavior, because again, it's just a way to express to somebody else that we're in pain. And in my work, we bring in couples to our laboratory on campus, and we ask them to talk about what the pain is like in their lives. So they speak for about 10 minutes to each other about what it's like to have pain, sometimes for the very first time. And we get these kinds of quotes from our participants in our research studies where they're talking about their emotions about pain. So for instance, I experience pain daily, but also frustration and guilt. Frustration because I can't do things comfortably or at all that I used to do. Guilt because not only is my life changing, but it also changes those around me. I keep wondering if everybody is just going to up and leave me because they can't stand being around this person anymore. And so we hear a lot from couples, and in particular people with pain, about their sadness about pain, worry about pain, anger about pain. And we have tried to figure out, is that real? Is that a pain behavior or is that something else? And when we do this work, we find that disclosing emotions, telling other people about your emotions about pain, is a very common experience. About 2/3 of our couples express their emotions about their pain to their partner. So most people do that. But during the conversation, they might only do it once or twice. And the people who are more likely to tell other people about their emotions are not surprisingly people who are in greater distress, which is part of being human, right? When we're in distress, we share that with other people. So people who report more pain, more worry about pain, more depression, are more likely to talk about their emotions with other people. And so we've started to call this disclosure, emotional disclosure of pain-related distress. And a colleague from Belgium and I, Lisbeth Gobert and I, have tried to think about whether this should be considered a pain behavior. Because the dominant model in the pain treatment field happens to be an operant model, which I'll talk about in a moment. And according to that, we should really be trying to reduce the number of pain behaviors. The thought is that if people are engaging in pain behavior and we encourage them to engage in more pain behavior, that will lead to disability. And so the idea is, let's instead encourage people to engage in activity and well behaviors rather than pain behaviors. But if we think about those emotional disclosures as a pain behavior in that way, that means we should ignore people's emotional disclosures. And in fact, when I speak to people with chronic pain, including people in my own family who have chronic pain, they often say how physicians, other healthcare professionals, and sometimes their family members ignore them when they express their emotions about pain, when they express sadness, that is something that they've been taught to not paying attention to it, but it also feels terrible to not have your emotions addressed and paid attention to. And so we are very interested in trying to tease this apart and think about, is emotional disclosure a disability promoting behavior, or is it something else? And we see it at the intersection of it's an emotional disclosure about pain, but when we think about other emotional disclosures, let's say a disclosure about something wonderful that happened in somebody's life, or a disclosure about a loss, like a job loss or friendship loss, we encourage people to talk about those things. So why is it different with pain? And we reviewed the literature and found that there's not that many surveys or instruments or measures that are used to assess these emotional disclosures of pain. They're often left off of many of the pain behavior checklists. But on the flip side, sharing emotions about impending medical procedures like knee surgery or dental procedures is related to less pain after the surgery. So sharing emotions, although some may think that that's not a good thing, is actually related to a lot of positive outcomes. So perhaps attending to the emotional disclosures is the way to go, to be responsive to them. There's also quite a bit of research in social psychology and emotion psychology saying that emotional disclosing is actually a very healthy behavior. So interacting with other people improves our mood and reduces our distress. And so when we're disclosing emotions to other people, that actually improves our individual well-being. This is called interpersonal emotion regulation. Sharing our emotions also can meet a lot of different goals, and can be effective in that way in terms of bonding with other people, gaining support from other people, feeling like we have a valid, real experience. And sometimes sharing our emotions helps us get some comfort or advice, or even just helps us think about something differently. So all of this evidence is pointing to the idea of emotional disclosure as being a positive process. And so at the same time, there can be a dark side. You may have some friends who disclose their emotions a great deal, and that can be burdensome to other people. And in fact, sharing continuously about distressing things in our lives can make it difficult for us to recover emotionally. But for the most part, disclosing emotions about pain may be beneficial to people with pain. This may not be a behavior we want to reduce. We may not want to ignore emotional disclosures. And that's, I think, a very key thing for people with pain to remember, that being able to disclose emotions is important. That also means that partners need to be open to those disclosures. And as a partner, it's good to know what the person with pain is looking for. Is it problem solving, a listening ear? There may be many reasons why someone is disclosing. We shouldn't automatically assume why or the response that somebody wants. But it's hard to disclose our emotions, especially if we have encountered negative responses. If somebody responds to us when we're in pain and they say, oh, I can take care of pain better than you can, or feels pity for us. Those kinds of responses can shut down a person with pain so that they don't disclose their emotions and they just keep it inside, which that also is not the healthiest outcome for the person with pain or their loved one. So we're going to then move now to, well, what does responsiveness look like? How should people respond when there is this kind of emotional disclosure? There's quite a bit of research in the pain and brain sciences, and specifically social neuroscience, which is the neuroscience behind our social interactions. So how is the brain involved in how we interact with other people? And the research suggests that social situations can affect our awareness of pain, because bodily sensations are processed in the brain along with the things that are going on in the environment, how people treat us, how close we feel to other people. And we've found in our own research that when people have a satisfying interaction with somebody right before something that's going to cause them pain, it can relate to less pain. So there is this evidence of social interaction kind of affecting how sensitive we can be to pain, or how intense pain feels. And there's several different kinds of models that explain the role of partner responses in pain. Some focusing on pain behavior, some focusing on emotion and intimacy. And I'm going to focus on how partner responses affect our ability to regulate our emotions and how it affects our intimacy. And the reason for that is that if we can regulate our emotions, which means having some control over our emotions, or being aware of our emotions and being able to label them and experience them and tolerate them, that can assist us in coping with pain and coping with the way pain interferes with our daily lives. And in particular, there are two responses that have been the center of my research: emotional validation and emotional invalidation. Emotional validation is a very partner responsive behavior that conveys acceptance of the other partner. So if someone expresses their emotion about pain, like, I'm so upset that I can't attend my child's concert today because I would have to sit for a long time and my back is killing me today. An appropriate emotional validation response might be this partner saying, oh, I'm so sorry that you're experiencing this, or I know this is frustrating for you. So being able to reflect back that emotion and to understand it, perhaps to ask questions like, what do you think, what happened? Like, what are some other things that we can do? Even gently touching somebody and looking at them. We've all had that experience of someone just simply putting their hand on our shoulder or our hand and looking us in the eye, and we know that they're with us. Those kinds of caring and comforting behaviors are also considered emotional validation. And validation isn't just saying, yeah, it does stink that you can't go, and then that's it. It's not just agreement. It's not just positive affect or someone just using humor. It has to be really that kind of response that sends the signal that, you know what, I accept you for who you are, and what you're feeling right now is real, and I'm with you in this. Whereas emotional validation conveys disrespect and sometimes active hostility, so basically a lack of acceptance of the partner's emotions. So an inattentiveness, so maybe not even responding to the partner, ignoring the partner if they express that emotion about how pain is interfering with their lives, changing the subject, saying, oh, well, you can't go, what's on the agenda for tomorrow? So not even addressing or acknowledging the anger that the person is experiencing. It can also include hostile responses like yelling at the person, telling them that they're a baby, comparing statements like, I have just as much pain as you, and I can go and I can sit for that long. What's wrong with you? Okay. So all of those kinds of responses are invalidating responses, and they are signaling disrespect, but also a complete lack of acceptance of the other person's experience. And what we find, luckily, in our research, and I hope that this is true for you too, is that for most people, spouses are responding in an emotionally validating way. And for many couples, that's the only way their spouses respond, is with emotional validation. The person with pain feels like their partner is with them. However, in a sizable portion, so 22% of our couples, people with pain, say that their spouses respond with emotional invalidation. Actually, I should say, in these studies, we are objectively coding their behavior. So they're being video recorded, and we code the behaviors according to a coding manual. So it's not just that they're reporting this, but we are also seeing this. And in 6% of the couples, that's all we see is invalidation throughout the interaction. And so we've been curious as to why spouses choose the different responses that they use. And spouses who are anxious, either about the partner's pain or they have just had more anxiety symptoms, they worry more about lots of different things, they are the people who are more likely to respond in these invalidating ways. And so it may not be necessarily that somebody is responding with emotional invalidation because they're trying to be hostile or trying to shut down the person with pain, although that's what it may feel like sometimes. But it's that they are anxious. And in some of our conversations with the participants, they don't know what to do. They want to solve the problem of pain, and they feel helpless in the face of pain. And so it comes out in these invalidating comments toward their partners. So in this research, we've tried to think about, well, what kind of interventions we want to do with people with pain to help them cope with the pain better, but also to enlist the support of partners. But as we would present this research, we had some colleagues of ours who said, well, you are arguing that emotional validation is a good thing, but really it's going to be reinforcing these pain behaviors, and how you should not be promoting a partner response that may lead to disability. And so we felt the need to test this a little bit more before we proceeded to the intervention phase. And so we did an experiment, and this experiment was with couples who did not have chronic pain, but we subjected one of the partners to pain with the cold pressor task, which is a a standard pain task where the person immerses their hand in the water, and as it stays in that cold water, about 6 degrees Celsius, it becomes more and more painful. And we wanted to see if we gave the partner, in this picture, you'll see the partner is a woman. We give the partner an instruction. So during the task, please try to imagine how your partner feels about what is happening. So they're giving this empathic induction. And then we compared it to a control group where the partner got no instruction. And we tested to see what the pain ratings were during this task. And so some of my colleagues would have argued that giving that empathy frame of mind to the partner would lead to more emotional validation, which would lead to more pain. We suggested or hypothesized the opposite, which is what we found. And so the red line is showing you that the partners who received the empathy induction, when the partners received the empathy induction, the participants who had to undergo the cold presser task, who are experiencing pain, had slower accelerations in pain and less pain for most of the task. So empathy led to less pain. And we found in general, for both groups, experimental group or the control group, the more validating the person with pain perceived their partner to be, the less pain they experienced overall, which suggests that an empathic orientation and emotional validation can lead to lessened pain. And there's since been other evidence showing that partner responsiveness, this emotional validation and empathic responses to people when they're experiencing distress about their pain and about their illnesses, leads to less interference, greater mood or improved mood. There have been some interventions for people built upon these things to show that validation is related to less pain. And so with that in mind, we thought, okay, this is a possible targeted intervention. But a key is that partner responsiveness and validating responses have to meet the emotion regulation goals to be effective. If you're the kind of person who doesn't really feel the need to disclose your emotions to other people, it's not because you've had any bad experiences, but you're just not that kind of person, then you may not need to express your emotions, and you may not need more validation in your life. You may be perfectly happy. So it really depends on the individual. What we do find is that invalidation, we haven't found a couple yet who appreciates and likes invalidation. So behaviors like criticism, hostility, contempt, across a number of studies are related to negative outcomes. So that is something we want to try to refrain from and try to help people learn new skills, new strategies to be able to deal with those kinds of responses. So how can we do that? The key here is that partners must work together. And that may seem trite, but in the pain field and in some of the other chronic illness literatures, the person with pain or the person with illness are often treated individually, which again can have some benefit. But if the partner is not available and they're not integrated into the treatment, it's very difficult to then go back home and practice healthy coping strategies when the partner is not in on it, and also when the partner is not engaging in healthy coping strategies themselves. So we developed an intervention to try to think about chronic pain and coping in this way, that individuals need to engage in flexible adaptive coping in the context of a healthy relationship for us to see improved health and well-being over the long term. And this paper is coming out this year, and it describes our intervention and the background behind it. So not only does each individual need to practice good skills, but there's two sets of skills that we believe are important. One of them are psychological flexibility skills, And if you have done mindfulness work or have engaged in acceptance and commitment therapy, this will sound familiar. So this is the ability to attend to and remain in the present moment, while also adapting to the environment in a way that's aligned with your values. So skills like mindfulness, meditation, accepting yourself for who you are, and accepting also and tolerating your own emotions, and thinking about the things that you value. And I'll talk a little bit about that. How do we do that? The other piece are relational flexibility skills. So that's the ability to interact with one's partner, again, in the present moment. So being fully attentive and responsive in a way that supports your partner, but also supports yourself. And it should be no surprise that the skills that fall within this grouping would be healthy emotional disclosure and empathic partner responsive listening. We call the intervention mindful living and relating. And here's another way to look at the psychological and relational flexibility skills. So psychological flexibility skills include being able to observe your thoughts and feelings, knowing what's important to you and acting on it, and the relational flexibility skills. They also include values. What kind of partner would you like to be? So whether you're a person with pain or a person without pain, or you both have pain, which we often find in our research, partners they have an idea of what kind of partner they want to live up to be, their ideal. And we sometimes forget that in the midst of our busyness, in the midst of pain, in the midst of other stressors that are going on. So how do we reconnect with that and engage in mindful listening and responding? And so we start the intervention just getting a history from the people with pain and from their partners about their relationship, how they met. And I would actually recommend this as a great way to reconnect with a partner, because often that first session, couples have not talked about that in a long time. And so simple questions like, how did you first meet? And how did you know that this person was the one you wanted to spend the rest of your life with? That in itself, those kinds of questions can be highly therapeutic. So we do that in the first session, introduce the rationale, and then try out some different exercises. Each session includes some experiences of these different exercises and practice. And then between sessions, each partner has a little bit of homework, some assignments to try to engage in these. And we think of all of these exercises as a toolbox that each partner may find certain mindfulness exercises or couples exercises more or less effective, but at least they have a number of skills they can draw on when they need to. And then the first 3 sessions really focus on these individual mindfulness and values goals. And so I'm going to do one with you right now, which is the anniversary exercise. And this anniversary exercise is a values exercise. So it's trying to get you in touch again with what it is that's important in your life. And I'll read a little bit of this to you. So imagine that it's 10 years from now, and you've gathered together your closest friends and relatives to celebrate the last 10 years of your relationship. Imagine that your partner stands up to make a speech about the last 10 years of your life together. What you mean to him or her, the role that you played in his or her life. Imagine your partner saying whatever it is you would most like to hear. And this is not about what your partner would say right now, but it's what you want your partner to say. What would you love to hear your partner say? And about all areas of your life. And then imagine that other guests come up and talk about the two of you as a couple. What would you like them to say about you as a couple? how you spend your time together or how you help other people, whatever it is. And what we often have to do is try to reorient people, because they'll say, well, people wouldn't say this. And we say, well, it's not what people would say at this point. It's what you want people to say. The goal of this kind of exercise is to help you to see the things that you really value in an imaginative way. And then the next step would be to look at your everyday life and see, okay, I think these domains are really important to me. Am I living my life as if they are important to me? And just, it's a really great way to orient yourself into what you value as a couple and how you spend your time together and how you treat your partner, but also what you value individually. So that's one example. Another example in terms of starting to pay attention in the present moment of the different emotions that we experience would be the Leaves on the Stream meditation, which is adapted from both Eastern meditation principles and practices, and also ACT. And so this particular, you may be familiar with it, it's a classic exercise where you close your eyes, and let your breath settle into a rhythm, and imagine you are sitting by the side of a gently flowing stream, and there are leaves floating on the surface of the water. For the next few minutes, you would allow every thought or feeling that pops into your head to land gently on a leaf and let it float on by. If your mind says, "This is stupid," you can take those words and place them on a leaf and let them float on by. And you do that for a few minutes, always just gently returning your attention to the leaves you may see on the stream. And it's a great way to notice the so many thoughts and feelings that we experience on a momentary basis without any awareness, and to cultivate that sense of being in the present, being aware of our emotions. Because when we're with somebody else and we're trying to be responsive to them, we need to sit in that space of being mindful of what we're feeling, being able to label it, and being able to be present to the other person. So after the couples go through all of these individual sessions, or these sessions focusing on individual coping strategies, they're always together in the session with each other. We then focus on relationship activities. So mindfulness activities that involve the partner, values activities that involve the partners finding something they both want to do together that they value, and practicing emotional disclosure in a mindful way and partner responsiveness. One of our most popular exercises in this grouping is the mindful hand-holding exercise, where we ask couples to find a comfortable place together where they can be seated and hold hands gently. And during that mindfulness practice, they're focusing on their breath, but also just noticing the feeling of the partner's hand, the weight, the feel, the temperature, maybe even the pulse. And every time your mind wanders, to just focus back on the feeling of the hand of your partner's hand. After this exercise, partners are often, there's a palpable change in the room where it's a more intimate quality and a more calm quality. It's a very easy exercise to try. So also in terms of our partner responsiveness, we always start with sharing a positive emotion, something that you like about your partner, just letting them know, something that makes you happy, content, feel at peace, something that they've done, as a way to try out emotional disclosure and partner responsiveness. And then when it comes to expressing negative emotions, we always caution couples to not lodge complaints about each other, but to bring up something stressful in their lives. So if the person doesn't have pain, trying to disclose something about a work situation, their frustration or anger about a work situation, and having practice engagement in terms of disclosing that emotion and the other person being able to listen attentively and respond in an empathic way. So for our research, what we are trying to do is figure out for whom these kinds of interventions work best, whether these things are specific to chronic pain, which I doubt. These seem universal to many couples who are coping with frustration. What is unique about chronic pain is that it's not visible. You can't take the temperature from someone to see if they have chronic pain, so that adds an element of being able to have direct communication is important. And what prevents people from disclosing their emotions, but also from engaging in emotional validation? What is the block there, and how can we overcome it? For couples and dyads and also healthcare professionals who are working with people with pain and their families, my questions based on this research would be for you to think about what do you value, and how do your values align with everyday life behaviors? Are there some changes that can be made, or perhaps a value can be changed? How aware are you about what you're thinking and feeling? I know sometimes I feel very aware, and then I find out later I was not aware at all. How can you set up your routine so that you and your partner have a chance to spend quality time with each other, whether it's to try out some of these mindfulness activities, to disclose your feelings, but also to respond with validation. If the conditions are not right, if we're rushed all the time and we never see each other, or we never have some quiet time together, even if it's just a brief moment to connect, it's very hard to have that disclosure and partner responsiveness. So I'd like to close this part of the webinar with a quote by Simone Weil, a writer, who thought that attentiveness and responsiveness, well, the key to partner responsiveness is attentiveness, just being attentive to the partner. And she gave, this is a quote from her that I think is wonderful. "The capacity to give one's attention to a sufferer is a very rare and difficult thing. In the first legend of the Grail, it is said that the Grail belongs to the first comer who asked the guardian of the vessel, a king 3/4 paralyzed by the most painful wound, 'What are you going through?' It is a recognition that the sufferer exists as a person, exactly like us. For this reason, it is enough, but it is indispensable to know how to look at that person in a certain way. Only the person who is capable of attention can do this." As healthcare professionals, partners, loved ones, we must cultivate this sense of attention to the people that we love and care for. And I would just like to express gratitude to a number of collaborators on my research projects, funding that we've received to do these projects, participant couples, and fellow researchers. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. To our audience at this moment, we're entering our question and answer period. So if you have any questions, please type them into the question box on the GoToWebinar panel and we'll read them out loud. One question that came in, you mentioned partner responsiveness at the beginning of the presentation and that there were some studies pertaining to the subject. Can you recommend any of these in particular?
Yes, so there is a study by Stephanie Wilson that just came out in 2017 on partner responsiveness and how that affects long-term interference, daily interference of pain. And I can make sure to give the full reference to Angie so that she can distribute that after. And I have a few other ones that I can compile.
Great. Another question that came in, I squirm in pain at night and this wakes up my spouse. She's tired when she goes to work. I have talked about sleeping in a different bed, but she insists that we not do that. I try to squirm less, but that increases my pain. Do you have any recommendations?
So interference with sleep is, of course, a very common problem. And that's a tough one, because being able to sleep in the same bed in the same room with a partner is a way to be a couple. That's kind of the way we think about what it's like to be a couple in the Western world, at least. If she is insisting that you stay there and you've had open conversations about it, it sounds like that would be that's a positive thing. But perhaps that would be something that you talk about more, about how it's affecting you as well, that it's affecting both of you. And that might also be something to talk about with a healthcare professional, about different ways to deal with that. I know that this may seem silly, but I know that there are some mattresses that are less sensitive to movement of a partner, because I think that's also an issue for people without pain, for couples without pain. So that might be something to look into. I'm sorry, I don't have more ideas.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Another question that came in. If I remember correctly, there seems to be a gender difference in terms of how validation can influence pain and disability. Can you comment on why this is?
So there are gender roles in emotional, couples interactions, at least in heterosexual couples, are gendered, where males are expected to behave a certain way and females are expected to behave a certain way. In our research, we found no gender differences in the amount of validation and how it relates to the outcomes. But I think this is where we have to think about what are the emotional disclosure goals of the person with pain. And it could be that men don't want to be, I shouldn't pick on men, but that if somebody really doesn't want to be, their reason for disclosing their emotions about pain is not because they want comfort, but because they want problem solving, let's say. Emotional validation may not be effective, may actually make them feel like dissatisfied, because that's not what they were looking for. They weren't looking for validation. They were looking for someone to help them solve their problem. So whether it's men or women, one thing that partners can do when someone is expressing their emotions about pain is just to say, okay, I'm hearing you. What can I do for you? Do you want me to problem solve, or do you want me to be here to listen to you? And sometimes that very simple question, you get the answer like, I need someone to just listen. I'm not into problem solving. Then you can respond in the way that matches that person's goals. And that may be a more universal way of thinking about validation differences than just saying, perhaps all men want this and all women want this.
Mm-hmm. Another question that came in. I work with patients who sometimes mention their partners dismiss the pain experience or make disparaging comments. Is there any advice I can give to them?
So in that case, it's hard to know why that invalidation is happening. It could be resentment about how the relationship has changed because of the pain. It could be because they feel helpless. And so it comes out in dismissive or disparaging ways. I think this is when inviting a family member or a loved one to come to appointments can be beneficial because they can hear from an authority figure that this is a real problem, that it's not all in the person's head, that they're really struggling. They want to and they want to live a good quality of life. I think to have the partner hear that from a physician or a physiotherapist, whoever is the treatment provider, can be a huge step. Now, if they don't want to come in at all, then it gets much harder. And in that case, the person with pain can be advised about how to find the support they need, perhaps in other ways. So we don't need to get everything from our spouses. Sometimes there's a misconception that all of your needs need to be met by this one person. And sometimes finding other people to disclose to and find and get that support from can be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Another question that came in, you mentioned the benefits of healthcare practitioners knowing this information between partners. Have there been any studies of caregivers or consultants following these practices for better patient outcomes?
Not yet, although there are some studies looking at healthcare professionals' empathic behaviors and their attempts at validating the patient's experience with some good effects, but not necessarily the reinforcing the involvement in these particular kinds of interventions. But that would be a great step, because now you're enlarging the circle from just the person with pain to their family, the healthcare provider, and the larger system.
Mm-hmm. Another question that came in, is there any weight to a partner's belief in the authenticity of the patient's pain as a precursor for them providing emotional validation? And how would clinicians provide partners' belief in the frequency of the patient's pain for the emotional validation they provide?
Right. So I'm not aware of research that looks at the partner's belief in the authenticity of the pain, how real that pain is, and how that predicts validation or invalidation. And I think that would be a really good study in terms of looking at all the different reasons why. So to back up, most partners are engaging in validation, so that's a good thing. But to try to figure out, when does that not happen? Is it because the partners are doubting the authenticity of the pain? Is it because they feel helpless? Is it because they're jumping into problem-solving mode and they're not thinking about the emotion as something important to validate? I think studies that can tease that apart would be very important next step for trying to figure out how to intervene in all those situations. And then what was the second part of that question?
Belief in the severity and frequency of the patient's pain and thus the emotional validation they provide.
Yeah, so I think that's an open question. But you can imagine that if a spouse does not believe that the pain is as severe as the person with pain is saying, that would be a setting for invalidating behaviors, whether it's dismissiveness or ignoring or active hostility, unfortunately.
I think we have time for one more question. For the person who is suffering from pain, is there any way they can talk to their partner in a way that would allow them to relate to the person in pain instead of, just listening to him?
So is there a way for the person with pain to encourage a validating response from
Yes.
partner? Okay. Yes, and I think sometimes So this is a universal thing. We sometimes think that our partners know what we're thinking or feeling without us actually saying it out loud. And this mind reading idea, we all do it. We all assume that our partners know what we're feeling and know what we need or want. And that's just not true. No human is that smart. So one of the things that you can do is during a quiet, unharried moment to be able to say to the partner, you know, I'd like to talk to you about my pain. And I just, you know, I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I'm worried about it. And I just need a listening ear. You know, can we spend a few minutes talking about this right now? And so just being very explicit about what you want to talk about and what kind of response you're looking for. Like, can you help me problem solve this? Or can you just listen? I think it would help me to just have you listen. And what I'm really hoping is that you can, if listening is not just what you want, but you also want a reflective, empathic response, to say, what I really need is for us to be on the same page, and I just need you to support me. Those kinds, being able to say that out loud and be specific with your partner, although it might sound really forced the first time you do it, that's the only way your partner sometimes is going to know what you're looking for and what you need. So that's what I would advise.
Mm-hmm. I think that's all the questions we have time for at the moment. Annmarie, is there anything you'd like to add following your presentation?
No, I thought those were very thorough questions. Really good.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your time for answering them, and thank you for your presentation.